Hi, this is Rob Sheen with the Source Conference, and I'm here with Richard Stiennon, and he's going to be a keynote at Source Boston coming up on May 1st through 3rd, and he's going to be speaking about zero trust networking and cloud transformation. So those are big terms, and we hear them thrown around a lot. I'm curious to hear your take on it. So why don't you tell us just a little bit about what your keynote's about, Richard?
Okay, thanks, Rob. So the first of all, zero trust has at least two meanings. And the first meaning I was familiar with was for data storage when you're sharing information via Dropbox or Box. A zero trust model for those kinds of services was one where you own the keys, and you didn't trust the administrator of the service you were using to encrypt and keep your data safe, because if you hold the keys, you don't have to trust anybody. So zero trust means not the bad side where I don't trust you. It means I'm not going to trust you, and your technology doesn't require me to trust you. But it translated, and it's being picked up by network providers as a kind of a different meaning. So in the keynote, I walk through examples and describe how zero trust networking can be implemented. There's actually a lot of things that can accomplish it today, and what it means for the future. And in short, zero trust means you no longer expose your applications to the entire internet. So it's undiscoverable. Sometimes implementations are called stealth. So the application's not there. There's invariably a broker in between. You authenticate, each user of an application authenticates to the broker, and the broker checks with Active Directory at whatever level of authentication is required. Make sure you're authorized to see an app, and then it tells the app, hey, this guy's trying to talk to you. And it reminds me of back in the early days of modems, when you used to have the phone home feature on the advanced modems that you could just set a little setting in the firmware, and it would never answer the phone. So you couldn't war dial a bank of phone numbers and try and figure out which ones had modems attached to it. If you did happen to call a modem, it would immediately hang up and then call home to the one phone number that it was allowed to connect to via the phone lines. And that's how all of I saw it deployed in the Alaska pipeline. So the big pipeline across Alaska has to have sensors and things and turbines that have to report home. And so the operators would call the modem, and it would call back and make a connection, and then they could telnet in. So accomplishing that in the cloud posed some difficulties, but people are overcoming it with either way down at the protocol level, like a host identity protocol, which is built for this kind of thing, or merely a cloud service that does that brokering in the middle. And now it means that you can launch your application, say an internal HR app or one for your customers. Only they are allowed to ever see the application. So it could be in some cryptically named AWS bucket, but nobody knows it's there. Can't scan for it, can't find it, but you can get to it. So immediately it takes out a huge proportion of the potential attackers against your application. So which reduces how much you have to worry every day. And it means the only attackers are going to be authorized users. And hopefully you can take the next layer of security to monitor their activity and identify when either they've been compromised or they're acting inappropriately.
Right. So, that's definitely an interesting place that if we can get to that, clearly that takes away a lot of the normal attack vectors. But I got to say, I see a lot of companies that are so buried in technical debt, I can't imagine them getting there anytime soon. So how do you see this evolving in a way that, more just like the few haves can pull it off? And then it's kind of like with Agile, like a bunch of people are doing it really well, and there's a whole bunch of people that are not, right? That are kind of muddling along and trying to make it work. And most people I see actually have like Agile and a half. It's like, some version of Waterfall merged in with Agile, and they kind of just make it work, but it's not really fully Agile.
Yeah, they layer it in. They say, okay, we're going to still do all the old Waterfall stuff, but we're going to take a
Right. So
week out and do
how do we
Agile.
not end up with just some yet another hybrid
Right.
where people are kind of doing one part of it correct and the other part of it kind of half-assing it?
Yep. Well, I was looking into this and started talking to a bunch of what we would think of normally as maybe big, stodgy, slow-moving companies, and I interviewed 16 of them for my book, Secure Cloud Transformation, and that's where I derived a lot of this understanding of what's happening. So we're talking about Siemens, Pulte Homes, Fannie Mae, all have discovered that they have to go this way. And it wasn't a security thing that led them down this path. It was like the guys at NOV, which is kind of a small version of Schlumberger, at least that's how I think of them. They make oil drill heads for oil and gas exploration. After the financial crisis in 2008, they, were unprofitable and, losing money, and they had to cut costs in their IT department. So they moved to this model where, first of all, it was kind of a cloud-first model. Hey, if it's too expensive to maintain our data centers, all those operating systems and servers and all the rest, we're going to move to Amazon or Azure. We're going to move all of our email to Office 365. And how do we do that? How do we accomplish that? And they decided that a cloud transformation was the right direction. So they started moving all their apps to the cloud, started using app-delivered clouds or cloud-delivered apps in order to get lower costs and costs that would scale with usage, not just be fixed like regular software costs are. And they got to the point where internal users of the systems thought IT was, in a time of strife for the rest of the company with layoffs and all the rest, they thought IT had a carte blanche to spend money because they got new features every single day, new capability and better performance on their email for Office 365. And of course, they got everything Office 365 throws in there all the time. So, that was just one example, and that was probably the smallest company I talked to. Though, frankly, you'd be surprised, Fannie Mae is a very small company, though it impacts trillions of dollars of transactions every single day. And they made that move, but Siemens, some of these companies, and their CIOs were just telling me their whole journey. I talked to Amazon and Microsoft and Google, of course. The Kelly Services, actually here in Michigan, had made this transition. It was kind of driven by a move to Office 365. So that's what kind of led me to discover the transformation that was going on. Because anytime you see any type of IT adaptation that saves money and gives you better performance and better security, that's a real movement to keep an eye on. So that's what got my interest.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, I've seen for a long time cloud is kind of like the great enabler. It's amazing to me. I remember starting up companies that we had to buy server racks. I remember having to set that stuff up. And now I could literally, while we're on the phone right now, with a few clicks of a button and a credit card, we could start a company right this second and have a website going by the end of the call.
Yeah. And you don't even need a credit card because Google or Amazon.
Right. A lot of it you can use for free. Right.
They give you a credit for a while. Yeah.
So what I'm curious about, though, is I remember we spent a lot of effort and energy learning and figuring out how to lock down the physical infrastructure.
Right.
And then as we started rolling out cloud, we've basically spent a lot of time trying to figure out that. And it seems like every time we're just about to kind of figure it out, we move on to the next bright, shiny thing. And the latest bright, shiny thing has been IoT. So I'm wondering, do you see a point where we're actually going to arrive at this transformation where things are actually done correctly, or are we just going to get halfway there and go to the next bright, shiny thing?
I do. I'm an optimist, though I'll admit all of our efforts to counter what the attackers are doing is a economic gain, and we have to increase the cost for the attackers so they stop. So right now, attackers are still in the mode where they can attack for free, right? Because people aren't protecting themselves, or you can always find somebody that's not protected and steal their data. But there are companies, the ones I've interviewed, Lockheed Martin, probably everybody in the defense industrial base, who and the big banks have all invested hundreds of millions of dollars in security. They've paid down their security debt, and I think they're ahead of the game. They're still attacked by nation-state actors who've got infinite resources compared to what we're used to. And they just have to continuously increase the expense for the attackers. But we all have to get there. And the cloud reduces that total investment in the expense because the people developing the defenses, we saw Microsoft now is really helping their customers identify when attacks are underway. They've invested the billions that are needed in order to make it effective. So they're going to share that as cloud services or being part of the cloud. So it's exciting times. I think might be in an inflection point in security, certainly in network security. Endpoint security still has a ways to go, but I'm starting to see some pretty cool things on the server side. Companies that will basically re-image your server every 60 seconds. So an attacker now has a time frame of 60 seconds to take advantage of a vulnerability. If they can't execute and launch their internal attack from there in 60 seconds, it's too late. That server's gone. They got to start over, which just means the attackers will get to the point where they can do an attack in 60 seconds, and then we'll have to come up with but now we got a dial. We can say, oh, okay, it's going to cost more in power, because we got so many virtual machines on standby waiting to go, but we can crank it down to 15 seconds that we keep replacing these servers. Pretty cool.
Right. So I kind of wonder, though, one of the big challenges I've been beating the drum on for probably close to 20 years now is the internal security problem. And I actually, when I go out, I ended up interacting with a lot of developers and end users and non-technical folks. And I've been telling people for a while now that back in the early 2000s, a bunch of us got on the security bus and it just kind of kept going. And a bunch of people didn't get on the bus and really never have. So I feel like when I talk to people now, even in 2019, the misconceptions around security are tremendous. And I'm wondering if we get to a point where we act like, on the inside, a lot of times we have this false sense of security, like, oh, it's on the inside, so it's good. So if we hit a point where we actually get to zero trust networking, I'm wondering, is that going to make the problem in that regard better or worse? Because are people going to have an even higher sense of false sense of security than they do now? Or will we actually be moving the needle there?
Well, it'll certainly, if you think of, I like to think of most of the threats are consistent and continuous, right? So there are just as many hacktivists out there today as there were back in 2000 when we got into this. And there are more, of course, and they're defacing more and more websites. It's just that, the news doesn't report about them because cybercrime came along and it's layered on top. All of them are growing at some rate, 24% a year or something. And then nation states came on board and, DDoS attacks always there. So all that's growing. But if you eliminate a lot of those layers, say all the cybercrime, all the outside hackers, then you're down to the insiders who are still sitting there and still as much of a risk. I call it, when you look at a security model, you have to look at the trust interstices. I can barely say that word. So look where in your data flows and in your models is the only protection that you trust the end user, right? And most every employer does this, right? I trust my end users not to rob me blind, right? Now, mind you, you see examples every time you go into a bank, you see a security camera looking over the shoulders of the tellers. And it's kind of your perception that's there to get the bank robber when they come in, right? Get a good picture of their ski mask. Not at all. It's to keep the tellers honest so they know that they're being videotaped constantly. So, and yet they still steal from the till. And that's the kind of, I'm not saying distrust your employees. I'm saying remove those areas where you have to trust them. And you do that, through just stronger authentication. And, you look at probably my favorite insider abuse case is Jerome Kerviel with Societe Generale Bank. And right during the financial crisis, they discovered that here's a guy who came from the back office where he was actually an IT guy, became a trader, and traded this French bank up into $50 billion exposure. And he did it by authorizing his own positions, even though he wasn't allowed to have more than $1 billion in exposure at any one day. He would authorize all of his positions by using somebody else's password, in the server room to get in and authorize that stuff. You just don't do that, right? You don't have shared passwords in a bank's operations, or you shouldn't, but they did. And he, cost them about $45 billion right when the market could least take it, and it helped contribute to the global financial crisis. So you look for those places where you trust your employees or contractors or suppliers, and start taking the trust part away, so it's authenticated, verifiable, monitored, tracked, etc.
Got it. So it sounds like it actually couldn't theoretically improve the situation if we've taken away the external things, the things people focus on.
Yeah, because then we focus on
back on the internal. All right, that's cool.
Finally.
That's a good prediction. We'll have to talk about this in another 10 years and see if it played out.
And don't forget, the sophisticated attacks when we talk about APTs and nation states and all those gangs, invariably they get the credentials and the capabilities of an insider before they actually get to do a lot of really bad damage.
Right.
So in that sense, a insider threat and an outsider threat actually coincide. They're the same thing.
Right.
Technically.
Yep. So speaking of predictions, I was on Paul Asadorian's Security Weekly recently, and he reminded me that you had made the IDS prediction back in the early 2000s about IDS kind of not being long for this world. Now, we obviously still have IDS products, but how do you feel your prediction has held up, and how does it play into kind of this new world order of Zero Trust?
And which IDS product can you name?
Which one?
Yeah, name one.
Why?
Because the industry is gone, right? Nobody went public with an IDS product.
I see what you're saying.
The one that everybody uses is free and open source, Snort.
Right.
All the rest of them, gone.
A lot of them are based on Snort too. Yeah. So
a lot of them are based on Snort. Yeah. So yeah, just like for data erasure, you use DBAN, which is a freeware thing that barely works anymore because it doesn't work on solid state stuff. IDS is, yeah, sure, set it up. But if you're an IT manager and your team is setting up IDS, you better be staffed to monitor that 24/7, including holidays and weekends. Back when I made that prediction, I met the IDS ops team from Cisco. And I said, how many people in your team? And the guy said, well, there's 6. And I go, wow, that's really hard to cover holidays and weekends with 6 people, 24/7. You need a lot more than that. And he says, oh, we don't watch our IDS on the weekends or holidays. And in other words, they did what every single person does who sets up an IDS. They log everything until the disk space gets filled up, and they buy more disk space. And then finally somebody comes in and says, hey, you're supposed to be doing something with those logs if you're ITIL or ISO compliant or trying to get certified. Oh, gosh, we don't have the time for that. So you outsource it to a managed security service provider who ignores the logs for you for a pretty hefty fee. So, IDS spawned a bunch of businesses, managed security services, and the SIM industry. So SIM, gives you a place to collect and a place to analyze your IDS logs. But most people, deploy it. They've got it. They can demonstrate to the auditors that they can create reports. But obviously, they still get whacked in a big, big way. You remember Sony Entertainment, when they got whacked, they were in the process of pulling back their SIM monitoring from a third party and doing it internally. And they're about a third of the way through that. And then, they got completely owned and disrupted based on attackers. So SIM doesn't help. So I'm still sticking to it.
All right.
I ran into somebody at RSA a couple of years ago, and I was in the W lounge there, and he comes up to me, pokes me on the chest, and goes, Stiennon, when you're dead, they're going to put IDS is dead on your tombstone. And I said, nope, they're going to put Stiennon is dead on my tombstone, which will be true.
Fair enough. All right, Richard. Well, we're definitely looking forward to seeing you keynote at Source Boston again coming up on May 1st through 3rd, and we'll be seeing you there.
All
So
right,
those of
it's
us
going
who
to be
want to
great.
continue that conversation, come on by a Source.
Yeah, come on by.
Great. Talk to you soon.